Story 1. Whether it is a rough rope representing a bad memory or a silk rope representing a good memory, if you hold on too tightly, you will get a rope burn. Story 2. If I were your mother, I would tell you not to marry that man. And I didn't. I will never forget this. Story 3. In life, we are always saying yes and no to everything. It's not simply yes or no. It is always a combination of both. For example, saying yes to staying at work late means saying no to time with your partner and children. While a few instances may not be a big deal, what you choose to say yes and no to will shape every aspect of your life. Story 4. During the intake sessions, I was sharing my entire life with the therapist. I made a conscious decision to be vulnerable and tell him everything that troubled me, regardless of how insignificant it felt. I believed that many of my problems were trivial or not worthy of concern because that was how they had been dismissed throughout my life. I felt embarrassed to admit some of the things I shared, thinking about his experience as a therapist and military veteran. What could my problems possibly mean compared to what he had encountered? At the end of our session, he looked me straight in the eyes and said, "My heart breaks for you." That was the moment I realized that my problems were not minor or trivial. I only felt that way because the people who hurt me told me I was overreacting or being too harsh in my reactions. My pain was real, and it should not have been dismissed in the ways it was. I am still navigating through this journey with help, but acknowledging that my pain and trauma are valid was the first step. Story 5. When discussing shortcuts to make my daily life easier, my therapist said, "There is no award or medal for making things harder on yourself." Story 6. 1. Do not try to reason with unreasonable people. 2. If you continue to be disappointed, it may be because of your expectations. Story 7. The only person you are spending the rest of your life with is you. Do right by yourself and no one else. Is it selfish? Yes. But so is everyone who comes and goes without considering your feelings. Story 8. You seem like someone who enjoys creating challenges for yourself. It's time to take a break and stop digging. Story 9. You are not responsible for the way your past has shaped you, but you are responsible for fixing and correcting that shape. Story 10. Follow the plan, not the feelings. This is great advice for changing behavior when trying to achieve progress and success. Story 11. I once confronted a therapist who just sat there, not offering any feedback or discussion. I expressed that I needed some sort of interaction. She said, "You seem to think that I can solve your problems for you." I never went back. Story 12. If you try not to be like your mother under any circumstances, you still use her as a measure to guide your actions. Story 13. Why do you keep seeking love from difficult people? I am being asked why I continue to seek attention and validation from those who clearly do not want to offer it to me, especially when there are others around me who will or have provided what I am looking for. I still do not have a complete answer to that question. Story 14. You are really considerate of others, even when having a panic attack. Your first instinct isn't to panic, but to leave the area to avoid disturbing others. You always bring a portable sick bag with you wherever you go because you don't want to make a mess. Normally, people should show concern for your welfare rather than reacting with anger when you are ill. I experience panic attacks when I feel sick due to some childhood trauma. This has helped me realize that my family's reactions when I got carsick were not normal. If they knew I was prone to motion sickness, they should have taken precautions by providing travel sick bags, water, and driving carefully instead of getting angry with me. Deep down, even when I'm supposed to focus on myself, I tend to prioritize the welfare of others first. Story 15. You can be the target without being the reason. This really reframed how I perceived my role in everything that happened to me. Not entirely, of course, but I think about the simple truth in this statement often. Story 16. Family counselor, when she explained that if something seems trivial to you but is a big deal for the other person, and it doesn't take much effort on your part to resolve this issue for them, why not just do so and avoid the fallout? The situation was a constant source of tension and conflict between my dad and me when I would consistently leave my bedroom light on. In my teenage mind, it was a non-issue. Who cares, right? Obviously, to my dad, who pays the electric bill, it was a significant concern. Rather than trying to make me understand why this was such a big problem for him that warranted grounding me, she just simplified it by saying it doesn't matter why it is a big issue for him. I didn't need to understand. The fact that it causes him stress and anxiety, leaving me with consequences, should be enough for me to try and do as he asks. I don't know. It was just a light bulb moment in my teenage mind that my life would be easier if I stopped fighting this issue for the sake of being defiant. I thought defiance was an Olympic sport. Really, I win if I make things easier for myself, and lessening my dad's stress about the electricity bill is a win for him and everyone else in the house. Story 17. It's valid to find joy in a wise character. Early in the pandemic, I confessed to her that my fondness for the character Baby Yoda, now known as Grogu, from The Mandalorian, was the only thing getting me through my days. I found her wording so amusing, and I think about it often. Story 18. Don't go to the hardware store looking for milk. Do not expect to receive something from someone who cannot give it, such as love from a narcissist or respect from an abuser. Story 19. My answer is different from the others. It is not a sentence that changed things. During therapy, I decided to study psychology, which I am currently pursuing. I told my therapist that he was one of the people who helped me realize what I want to do in life, and he said I had the potential to be a great therapist. While I do not wish to become a therapist, I will always be grateful for his encouragement and for the resources he continues to send me. Story 20. Your apartment will be messy regardless, so it doesn't matter if you go out and have fun or lie paralyzed on your couch thinking about it. Story 21. At one point, I was talking about my childhood in a matter-of-fact way and lifted my head to see her crying. We paused, and she tried to collect herself. I had to comfort her by saying reassuring things like, "It's okay. It was a long time ago." I remember crying for a couple of hours afterward as soon as I was by myself. Story 22. To combat depression, get more water, vitamin D, socialization, exercise, and sleep. And it worked. Story 23. Everything said here is confidential. It won't leave this room. That's the law. Except when on the drive home, Dad would question me about what I talked about with the counselor. Next week, you're a minor. I can share our discussions with your parents. I learned very quickly not to trust therapists. Story 24. I feel frustrated for you that your parents did not disclose your grandfather's history of being in and out of psychiatric wards. This information would have been vital to help us understand your genetic predisposition to depression and anxiety. First of all, I have never heard her use a sentence like, "I feel frustrated for you." And it made me feel like she cared and that it was okay to feel angry. Secondly, it opened my eyes to how mental health issues have been downplayed and dismissed in my family, which has contributed to my feelings of isolation and voicelessness. Now I realize that I am not a black sheep. I am not weak or unintelligent. One of the most successful and admired individuals in my family has also struggled with these kinds of issues. Story 25. We do our best until we know better. I have seen many therapists and psychiatrists, several of whom have said life-changing things to me, but this line is what I remember most from my first therapist almost 10 years ago. Story 26. Is this the model of love you want your daughters to experience? When I was struggling with guilt over considering leaving, I thought about what I would tell my daughters if they were in a relationship similar to the one I was in. The answer is to leave. Story 27. If your oral health is poor, your mental health may decline. I miss her so much. She really helped me through a dark time in my life. I wish I could go back and thank her more. Story 28. It was a cold, wet day. I was 13 and in family therapy. The therapist asked to speak to my parents before we started and invited me to take a seat. There were two hard plastic chairs on either side of a big, comfy upholstered chair. Since I was in my school uniform and my legs were cold and wet, I thought I would sit in the warm, comfy chair in the middle until my parents arrived, and then I would give the chair up to my mother. 5 minutes later, they all came back in, and the therapist immediately remarked that it was very telling I had chosen that chair. Apparently, I had done so to create conflict and divide my parents. I didn't bother to participate any further. Sorry, did you mean positive things from therapy? Story 29. I was in a dark place at one point and felt like I didn't want to be here. My therapist said, "You have already died multiple times because of everything you went through and emerged as a new version of yourself." It was oddly satisfying to hear her say that. Story 30. I told her something that was very embarrassing for me. She reassured me that it was normal. I wasn't unusual. It was a normal physical reaction from my post-traumatic stress disorder. She explained it so calmly that I felt less awkward. During one session, she also started crying. She apologized and shared memes about it. Honestly, I loved it. She was so cool. Story 31. Not a therapist, but an elderly person I cared for in my job for many years once said, "How can you expect to light up the night sky if you're all out of stars?" She explained that our energy is like transactional light. If we're always giving and never receiving, we slowly fade into darkness. As someone who has lived in darkness, I find this resonates with me, but unlearning this after 38 years is challenging. Story 32. The universe will engineer itself to prove you right. This helped me stop overthinking and worrying about the worst outcomes. If you constantly focus on the negatives, such as what you believe people say about you or what you anticipate will happen, you will find that life makes decisions for you. You are both consciously and subconsciously influencing the events in your life, and if you adopt a negative mindset, you will lead a negative life. Story 33. You are not a failure. There is nothing wrong with you. It became my mantra and helped me climb my way from the depths of depression. I still use it occasionally when I need to. Story 34. Why are you interested in computers? There is no future in that. In 1995, at age 15, I ignored that advice and have been working as a software engineer since I finished high school. Story 35. I once learned my therapist was anti-vaccine during one of our sessions. The entire session focused on her opinions about medicine and vaccination. I also learned she has asthma and frequently gets the flu but refuses to seek any treatment. That's when I realized why she was constantly sick and why my therapy sessions were frequently rescheduled. I immediately requested another therapist after that. Story 36. When I ask you how you are doing, you always say you are okay. But when we proceed to the session, it often turns out that you are not doing okay. It is completely fine to be honest about how you feel. It is the first step to acceptance. Story 37. 2 things that have saved my sanity and probably my life. Thoughts are not facts. Respond, don't react. Admittedly, she also said, "You drink far too much. Cut that back." Seriously. So there was some obvious advice as well. Story 38. First visit ever to one, her phone rings and she answers. After a few words, she hangs up and says to me, "Sorry. I usually don't answer the phone, but my mother just got diagnosed with cancer." Story 39. You are not the worst thing you've ever done. You are also not the worst thing that has ever been done to you. You made it through every other terrible experience you had before this point, so it is completely logical to say you will eventually get over your current issues as well. Story 40. Do not automatically trust that all therapists you meet will know, understand, have empathy, or care for your particular situation. Fallibility is a distinct human trait, as is preferential bias in method. Therapy is a job. Just as a bricklayer may misplace bricks, therapists may misinterpret. Do not be afraid to change your provider. Senior Clinical Psychologist, Royal College of London. Story 41. You've shared the things you've done for your relationship. Name the most important thing your husband has done in those 12 years. I couldn't name a single thing. Apart from teaching me how to cook, he had never really done anything for me. I proposed, planned our wedding, and encouraged him to see a psychologist. He never gave anything, only took. That is why he is now my ex, and my new husband has given me many things. A reprieve from feeling ashamed and inadequate after losing my job twice. An understanding that I don't need to hold in difficult emotions because we will face situations together. A partner who loves and respects me even during his difficult times, and a warm and loving place in his home and family. Although that's more of a gift from his family, of course. Most specifically, my ex expected me to change to fit his family. My current husband has made sure I know his family will welcome me as I am. Story 42. Forgiveness is not about the person who wronged you. It is about you giving yourself inner peace. I have never viewed forgiveness the same way. Story 43. When speaking about my suicide plan, he just smiled and said, "Return to nature." There was not a hint of judgment, and I discovered the joyful threads I had left. I spend a lot of time exploring nature these days. Story 44. Stop deflecting compliments. Whether you believe them or not, just say thank you. Took a lot of practice, but I have been doing it for a while, and it has helped my self-esteem more than I expected. Story 45. I thanked him for his help. He said, "You did this." Sounds simple, but as a confused young adult, it was important to learn that I had the power to change my own life. Story 46. Things do not always improve, but they do change. During my battle with severe recurrent depression, I was convinced I would always feel that emptiness and never experience normalcy. I had been struggling for a decade. I expressed my skepticism about the idea that it gets better, and he responded with reassurance. That was enough to keep me going. Story 47. Physical therapist, but I think it is still valid. Just because it hurts does not mean something bad is going to happen. Story 48. If you find yourself being overly critical of other people, chances are that you have a problem with your own self-identity. Story 49. I was told that I should go out, meet people, meet women, and engage in relationships. This was mentioned in front of my mother. Story 50. You are not crazy. You are having a textbook reaction to the experiences you have had. It was nice to have a clear resolution. It was not easy, but I did get there in the end. Story 51. Be honest. Don't respond with fine or good when someone asks how you are doing. If you are feeling bad, acknowledge it, knowing that it will get better. Have you tried saying, "Not good, but I will be"? I am a nurse, and I have shared this lesson with many patients and myself. No, I'm not good today, thanks for asking, but I will get better. Story 52. She put a toy frog, a squirrel, and a fish together and said, "What would happen if all of these lived together?" My analogy is that a fish can't live with a squirrel, and a squirrel can't live with a fish. So you have to adapt to certain surroundings. Story 53. Sometimes there are no answers, much less definitive ones, to the questions you ask about your experiences in past. It's okay to move on and heal. Story 54. After a tough session of inpatient therapy, I was leaving the building and saw my therapist walking down the street. The next day, I asked if he needed a ride. He said, "No, sometimes after heavy days, I just walk so I don't take things home to my family." I cried because I never realized how burdensome taking on everyone else's problems can be, even when you love your job. Story 55. Whose voice is it? The one in your head, saying all those negative things. Who is talking? Spoiler alert. The eldest daughter has issues with her mother. Story 56. When she said that my problem is thinking I would never be important to anyone, even though there is no evidence of that. It made me cry terribly, and it still hurts. She was right. Story 57. You cannot care for others if you do not care for yourself first. I realized this while I was exhausting myself to take care of my family. Story 58. What happened to me as a child wasn't my fault. For years, I struggled with that. I have always had mental health issues, and my family hated it so much I was neglected and abused because of it. My mom disliked the fact that I wasn't normal like her other children, yet they were far from it. I think I'm the most normal one, to be honest, despite everything. Story 59. I understand that you may not want to upset your family by discussing when your depression worsens, but not sharing this with them can cause you to feel bottled up until you burst. I'm sure it upsets them more than simply letting them know you are having a bad day. You don't need to explain yourself. Just inform them that you are not in the best mood, and you will be surprised by the difference it makes. Since then, whenever I feel my mood declining, I tell my loved ones that day that it's one of those days. They understand and either avoid bringing up any drama or offer help and support to adjust accordingly. Story 60. She threatened to call Child Protective Services on me for child abuse when I was trying to get help leaving my ex for abusing me. My child had never seen or heard of it. One time, when my regular therapist was unavailable, and I was in a crisis trying to leave my abusive ex-husband, a substitute therapist from an on-demand service was incredibly cold and cruel. She proceeded to interrogate me like it was a criminal investigation. I needed help because my ex had verbally and physically abused me. I told this new therapist from the beginning that, thankfully, my 6-year-old had seen and heard none of the altercation, as he was asleep on a different floor of the home while the incident occurred outside, and my child never mentioned it. This therapist was relentless, asking what my child might have seen or heard regarding the abuse I suffered and threatening. As a mandated reporter, I should contact Child Protective Services about what he might have seen or heard, because that is child abuse for you two to be fighting in front of the child. The call ended with me in more tears than before. She made me feel like a worthless mother, and I was terrified that Child Protective Services would show up at my door based on a mandated report while I was trying to leave my abuser. I have been a mandated reporter, and this experience was completely unhelpful and obstructive, filled with fear-mongering and a total power trip. I have thankfully never encountered anything like it before or since. I wrote the most honest review I have ever composed for that therapist and received a full refund along with an apology. I connected with my regular therapist the following week. That was definitely the most memorable experience. Story 61. I already knew. When I went to my emergency appointment to confirm or disprove my suspicion that my mother has narcissistic personality disorder, I genuinely thought he would call me crazy, but sadly it turned out differently. He wasn't rude, he was a psychiatrist, not quite a therapist. It turns out he had been subtly guiding me to realize the truth for a while, but every time he did, I dissociated. He had been gathering evidence for some time. The way psychiatrists perceive situations is both terrifying and fascinating. Story 62. I am very hard on myself, often being self-critical and holding myself to impossible standards. I think the sun shines out of my daughter and frequently spoke in therapy about what a wonderful person she is. In different conversations, I also discussed with my therapist how alike my daughter and I are. My therapist asked me why, if we are so similar, I am so harsh on myself. I am still not perfect, but that moment shifted my whole view of myself. How could I see my daughter as such a wonderful person, being so like me, while holding such a negative opinion of myself? I have seen various therapists over the years, but none really helped until this one. She managed to help me reframe many of my negative thoughts. She truly changed my life. Unfortunately, I can no longer afford to see her, but the things she did will stay with me for life. Story 63. Not to me, but to my father about me. It was the reason I got scared, stopped going, and to this day I don't trust to seek help again. She is too much for me. She needs someone more qualified. Story 64. While on a video appointment during the COVID lockdown, I immediately reported him for saying, "You look very pretty in your profile picture." Story 65. I am a woman, and my partner was a man. He wanted to know my feelings about gay individuals. I suspected he was gay because I questioned why he would ask that unexpectedly. I had a couple of therapists who seemed to focus more on themselves than on me, and both were men. Now that I think about it, I never had a female therapist during that period of my life. Story 66. While navigating the healing process from my abusive ex-husband, I encountered various issues along my therapeutic journey. I liken these challenges to a library cart filled with books. Can you go around the cart? Can you move the cart out of the way? Perhaps you can take some books off to make it lighter and easier to move. The issue isn't insurmountable. There are ways around it. This really changed my perspective. Story 67. If you heard someone speak about your friends in the same way you speak about yourself, how would you feel? It was helpful in encouraging me to treat myself with the same care and kindness that I would offer to those close to me. Story 68. Two things, actually, that I was neglected in multiple ways. I didn't realize the situation had been so severe. I even told her, "Oh no, I didn't mean to sound that dramatic." She repeated my exact words, and I confirmed them. She said that all of that is neglect, that I attract the wrong people because I used to be a people pleaser and needed to stop pleasing others and put myself first. I came to realize that if you always put others above yourself, the wrong people will take that for granted and exploit it. You become a doormat. Not everyone appreciates it if you do them favors. Some see it as a sign of weakness. I never did those things out of weakness. I did it because I always felt sorry for everyone except myself, not because I feared people or was desperate for friendship. Now, in the bigger picture, because my mother, who had a borderline personality disorder, always made things about her and guilt-tripped me over everything, I was used to putting myself last and everyone else before me. I was taught from a young age that my feelings didn't matter, that if I was tired, I had to pull through anyway because she wanted to go somewhere. I never had a routine either, so I didn't learn about self-care. She took us to the bar regularly, and we were in bed far past any other kid's bedtime. She would drink and use prescription drugs, which made her insufferable. Yet, at 9 years old, I was the one who had to take care of her, listening to her feelings until the early hours. I often had to get out of bed to pick her off the floor when she stumbled over her own feet several times a night, only able to sleep when I heard she had finally fallen asleep. Then, at 11 a.m., she woke us up again to go to the pool so she could get a tan. We would stay there until it closed at 7 p.m. and then head to the bar. One night, when her friend, who was somewhat sober, drove us home because she was completely wasted, I decided I was going to sleep over at her friend's house. I was tired. All I wanted was one night of uninterrupted sleep, to be treated and cared for like a child again. So I left her there on the floor, trying to convince my 5-year-old brother to come with me. He refused. The next day, she lost it. It was the ultimate betrayal. She hated me ever since. When I was 15, she often reminded me that I betrayed her that night. All she ever saw in me after that was the face of betrayal. Looking back, with what I know now, the neglect was already bad then, but after the betrayal, it got much worse. She hated me after that night, and I haven't been able to make it up ever since. She died when I was 15 in a car accident. My stepfather was driving drunk, and the other driver was speeding and a drug dealer. She was the only one who died. The other two had minor injuries. Story 69. You know that you can reach your dreams because you have done it before. I am a triathlete who completed my first Ironman 70.3 last summer and was in the best shape of my life. I trained 1 to 2 times daily for 8 months to get to where I was. Then I had 2 sports injuries back to back. I experienced an ankle stress fracture that took 4 months to heal and a shoulder injury that required surgery after 6 months of treatment. Now I am 2 months post-operation. I attended therapy due to the depression caused by the injuries and recovery. I gained 20 pounds and lost all the muscle I worked hard to build. I haven't been able to swim, bike, run, do Pilates, practice yoga, or lift weights for almost 8 months. The therapist reminded me that if I have done it once, I can do it again. It will be challenging, but I can do it. Story 70. Wherever you go, there you are. Changing jobs and environments does not change how I deal with stress and anxiety. I must manage it internally. Story 71. Is it worth the emotional energy? This is a fantastic question to ask yourself when you're in the midst of an ongoing argument with a friend or family member. Often, it just isn't worth it. In this case, I knew I was right, and I even had the testimony of someone else who was there at the time backing up my memory of events. A family member was calling me a liar, mainly because my memory of this event portrayed her behavior negatively. I had to let it go because it wasn't worth banging my head against a brick wall. She apologized much later, but I will never be close to her again, and I have to watch every word I say in case she takes it the wrong way. Story 72. People are looking at you. People are judging you. People are talking about you. This is what people do. You do it. Don't worry about it too much. Story 73. Talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend. Specifically, in the context of my diet, if I have a bad eating day, how would I talk to a friend versus myself? I often use negative words to describe myself. But if I imagine my best friend telling me she ate too many fries that day, I would reassure her that it happens, it's no big deal, and tomorrow is another day. I now apply that thought every time I speak negatively to myself, and it makes a world of difference. Story 74. I was in couples therapy when she said some unexpected things and excused herself to go to the bathroom. He looked me in the eye and told me to leave and never contact her again. He would take care of her, but for me, it felt like a life sentence that would drain my energy. He said I had too much life in me. Story 75. When I was talking to her about my love interest at the time, she said, I don't want to discriminate against you, but he's very attractive. Why would he want someone like you? She was referring to extremely feminine females who wore a lot of makeup, whereas I was the complete opposite. Story 76. After an intense session, my therapist asked me if I was okay. I replied that I was okay even though I wasn't. This allowed me to realize that I am in a situation where I can admit that I do not have to be okay. This planted a seed in my mind that eventually empowered me to take action months later. It is okay not to be okay. Story 77. I've had only a handful of therapy sessions, and 2 were family therapy. At one of these, the therapist started off by saying, we're going to be referring to each other as colors because you can't get mad at a color. This man was old and definitely had outdated techniques because what do you mean you can't get mad at a color? Not only is it foolish, as we all know what they're meant to represent in that moment, but all I could think of was that I'm from the age of screen names. I could get upset at someone called XX Penguin Lover if they said something foolish enough. I decided not to continue for other reasons, but I also immediately lost the ability to take this man seriously. Story 78. I was giving a debrief of my life. I stay home a lot because of my anxiety, but thankfully I have a partner who supports that. I was diagnosed with agoraphobia but would like to overcome it. I swear the therapist, who had mentioned multiple times that she was newly married, responded, so what do you bring to the relationship? You just stay home all the time? How is that even possible? Story 79. You have experienced trauma. That is all we can say to explain your issue. 2 weeks later, the problem was resolved with new medication. Do not allow a therapist to focus on trauma without a valid reason. It is misleading and may prevent you from seeing a qualified psychiatrist. Story 80. Patient appears to be of average intelligence. I had one session that lasted 2 hours, and it was my first time meeting him. It was a single session with that psychiatrist for a psychological evaluation, but I was struck by how the phrase seems to be at least stood out. Story 81. You have too many problems at once. Cannot help you. 40 hours in therapy to be rejected by him because I was who I am. So this seeking help thing did not turn out so well. Story 82. I informed her that my abusive ex and I only communicated through yelling and arguments. She believed that was acceptable because it was the only way we knew how to communicate effectively. However, she was mistaken. The relationship ended when he assaulted his sister, was arrested, and charged with domestic violence. This happened after I punched a solid wood door and nearly broke my hand. Now, I am in a healthy relationship where the only time we raise our voices at each other is when we are laughing or playing. Story 83. You need to think of your brain as a television. Right now, you are stuck on the sad and depressed channel. Just switch to a happy channel. If you wanted to end your life, you would have already done it. I attempted to harm myself and ended up in the hospital afterward. Story 84. Everyone who comes and goes in life serves a purpose, and it is okay to let go of someone if things are no longer aligned. Story 85. I'm preparing as this was 25 years ago. Whatever caused you to feel this way, we will get to the bottom of it. Someone or many people did something to you. It's not your fault. Tell me what happened. I was shocked. This is intense. This was court-ordered one-on-one therapy I had to attend weekly, in addition to my 3 other meetings each week, so I couldn't miss it or I would end up back in prison. Story 86. No matter how hard we try to prepare in advance, we cannot control what will happen in the future. Story 87. And how did you feel about that? Takeaway. A good therapist guides you to discover your truths through introspection. Story 88. If they were going to love you for who you are, they would have done it already. Why are you waiting around for these people? It helped me realize how awful my family was and how they expected me to be grateful for being adopted. They saw my disabilities as deliberate attacks on them, not conditions I was born with. It made me understand that there were no right words or right framing. They hate what I am and I can't change that. Story 89. The therapist said he has his quirks, referring to my delusional and paranoid ex-husband. Yes, so did Jeffrey Dahmer. Story 90. You will never recover from this. You will most likely be suffering for the rest of your life. I'm over it now. Story 91. I want you to tell me that you are using drugs. That individual was a former police officer with a thick brown mustache in a rundown trailer room, sitting beside his praying wife on the couch. I was crying because I wondered how many other children had been coerced into lying about their history. Story 92. I can stop time with my mind, so I'm never late. I never went back. But now, 15 years later, I wonder if she had early dementia or something. Story 93. Whenever you have sex with a new partner, you are also connecting with their previous partners, and they are connecting with yours. While those former partners may not be present physically, the emotions they shared remain tied to both that person and you. Story 94. 2 things. 1. Everything seems fine for you, so why are you here? The tone suggests indifference. There is no neutral emotion. She was not effective as a therapist. Story 95. You have to bear some responsibility for almost everything that happens in your life. Of course, this excludes obvious things like sexual assault, child abuse, natural disasters, and others. Story 96. Nature shows us life lessons constantly. First, I thought this was somewhat morbid. Sometimes older parents will eventually pass, which is necessary for their loved ones to survive. Story 97. My therapist helped me learn to be okay with crying, letting go, and expressing my feelings. I shared some difficult experiences I was going through, but ended each conversation with a tight smile. She saw through that and guided me on how to be authentic about my true feelings. It helped me become more open in my life and with expressing other emotions as well. Story 98. I cannot afford to pay you. We will have to sell the business. And that is how my first job ended. Story 99. She asked me what I meant when I was trying to bring my emotions back down to baseline. I was experiencing burnout related to autism spectrum disorder and didn't realize I was on the spectrum. I told her that when I am in a stable emotional state, I don't experience strong emotions. I could be as stable as a plant pot. However, because I am so emotionally detached most of the time, when I do get emotional, I become very emotional. There's no subtlety in my moods. If it's a positive emotion like happiness, I feel euphoric. Sadness quickly escalates into tears, and anger manifests as intense rage. Her confusion over my phrasing stayed with me for a long time. Apparently, typical people have a range of emotional nuances beyond simply on or off. It made me take a closer look at how I manage myself in stressful situations. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.